So this one is more, again, on inclusion disk, and it's more on the engineering side that as someone that has been focusing on inclusion disk over the last year, and I also started looking at FOCIL more and more, and this is where my perspective in terms of engineering challenge with regards to inclusion disk. So today, where we are, right? So today we have Ethereum slot, and each slot is 12 seconds. And what are the constraints within the slot? So as a proposer, I want to propose a block. And I will hate to have my block gets reorged, and that's not nice. So I want to propose my block on the strongest head that's possible, right? And after I propose a block, everyone else on the network that's running a node will verify the block and compute what is the head. And as a tester, their job is to attest to the head of the block. So this is where the 4-choice follows if you use LMD Ghost. And then as an aggregator, as optional, you aggregate attestations. And then the proposer essentially follows the votes for the next slot, and then it builds on top of the head, right? And then because of timing game, you can see there is a phenomenon that today, the attested cutoff is at 4 seconds. So basically everything is pushed towards the 4-second mark. And that's kind of the equilibrium right now, that everything happens between 3 to 4 seconds. And then between 4 to 12 seconds of nothing typically happens unless you're the next slot proposer, you're listening transactions, and you're building block. So where does inclusion disk fit into this picture? So here I'm speaking in terms of FOCIL. So FOCIL is a EIP-7805, I believe, but go search it if you don't know what FOCIL is. So FOCIL is probably the best inclusion disk design that I have seen so far that is mostly bulletproof in my opinion. And then it has the same slot property. And then, so what FOCIL does essentially is that it essentially allows secondary runs of proposals that are allowed to send their local block, and then such that it constrains the next slot proposer essentially. So where does that leave us in the picture, right? So because of that, we have to essentially add this proposer in the middle of the 12 slots. That means that as a proposer for the inclusion disk, I have to essentially verify the block beforehand such that I want to essentially propose the best inclusion disk effort, right? And then as a constraint, the next slot builder or the proposer, I have to essentially pack the inclusion disk into the block. And then if I miss inclusion disk, then I may miss my block. And also as a tester, I want to make sure that the block satisfies the inclusion disk. So there are 3 more constraints as a builder, as a proposer, as a tester, which I cover here. So where are some parameters that we can play in terms of trade-off? So for example, how big is the size of how big is the size of an inclusion disk, right? If the inclusion disk size is so small that it may not be useful, but the inclusion disk size is too big, then you open up network for DOS concern. What is the size of the inclusion disk committee? Because we want committee size to be reasonable, but then if the size is too big, again, you open up network DOS concern. And then how much overlapping are there within the inclusion disk? And then what is the satisfactory rule, right? So as a proposer for the next slot, as a tester, I'm verifying the block. Basically how much of the inclusion disk the proposer has to satisfy for the block to be valid. So what are the concerns? So first concern, I think, is the increase of bandwidth and compute for node. Depends on how big your inclusion disk size is. And then again, the second concern is that proposer, how much time do I have to build the block? And then as a tester, how much time do I have to verify the block? So here are some open questions for us to study if we're interested in this inclusion disk space. How compatible it is with the future roadmap, such as peer does, such as EPBS. How does inclusion disk work with account abstraction? And then how can we add blob transactions into the inclusion disk such that it doesn't open up DOS concerns? And then how can we better utilize local mempool for inclusion disk? Maybe we can just essentially send the transaction hash instead of sending the full transactions. Finally, will there be an auto protocol market for inclusion disk? And it's something that we need to study more. So yeah, if you're interested to contribute, definitely hit up Julian and then hit up me. And then, yeah, definitely, I'm definitely very excited about this inclusion, this design space. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we have time for a few Q&A. Please raise your hand if you have any question. Okay. No questions? Okay, seems, oh, there's a question here.
Yeah, super interesting. I had a question. So I don't know if you can answer this, but in any capacity, are you thinking about doing FOCIL or inclusionless for L2s like Arbitrum? Or yeah, and how does that differ from what's in the EIP and what could be on mainnet?
Right. So layer 2 today is most of the layer 2 or all of the layer 2 today, they have just one sequencer, right? So the sequencer definitely have a lot of power. Say today, if you want to force your transactions in there, like if sequencer ignores you, there's nothing you can do. But then there's a lot of people say, well, you can force transaction through layer 1, but that's also not nice because you have to wait like 24 hours, right? But then like, again, I think like decentralized sequencer kind of self-set if you assume an honest majority. So I would say the space in terms of censorship resistance on layer 2 is definitely very different on layer 1. Because on layer 2, you can essentially having like 1 million validators, you could just have like 10 sequencers and then trust like honest majority. And then as long as you assume some of them are honest and they like basically they have to include your transactions.
Any other question? Okay, well, thank you very much for your talk. Please give some applause to Terence.